Hey, welcome back to Métropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we got a new replay review for you, which is really exciting. We have a couple of these up on the channel. They're a lot of fun, but specifically we've never focused on corporation gameplay until today, which is phenomenal because left to my own devices, I'm actually much more of a corporation player than a runner player. And focusing on some corporation macro, micro play, it's going to be a treat. So what we have today, this is a game that was recorded on Jinteki.net Casual. This is not a tournament game. This is just two strangers playing a game. This replay was submitted to me by Diogen, who's actually the runner player. Diogen's a local player. You've probably seen his name on Netrunner DB online. He makes a lot of interesting decks, including this one. You can find the link in the description. But he shared this replay on our internal Discord for the Montreal meta, and I saw it and I thought, wait, this is a super cool replay to talk about, and not specifically for Diogen's play, but because of the opponent who's playing a built to last deck you might be really familiar with. That is the Built to Blast deck. We did a deck dive on this a couple weeks ago, so you can find a video linked on the channel. It's in the description. This video is about 2 hours long, and it's mostly gameplay, but while the first 15 minutes walks you through the deck itself and explains all the decisions in the deck, why the cards ended up there. You don't have to watch that for this video to make sense. Maybe watch the first 15 minutes to understand that we're on the same page about what the deck is, but in short, this might be a deck that you're really familiar with. And I think that's actually really fantastic because this deck very specifically forces some fundamental play patterns. It forces you to be aggressive, and it requires you to really be focused on your multiple angles and multiple win conditions you have access to, which is really good for newer players just because multiple win conditions is always really fun. The player that Diogen was playing against, it was just somebody on JNet that Diogen didn't know. So I went ahead and I just anonymized the name. It's not that they have anything to be embarrassed about. Their play is pretty great. But just because this is on the internet, we're just going to remove all the names and the icons. Those are all totally different. And that is mostly it. We're going to be spending the next time going through this game turn by turn, click by click. And we're going to be focusing on some, I think, two real basic fundamental ideas, which we'll be outlining in a second. In short, if you're a newer player, if you're a developing player, this sort of video series is meant to help you play with confidence and specifically play with intention. This game is really complicated. Even just playing the best turn on any individual turn can be hard, but then having an understanding on the macro end, what is our game plan? How does the board change? Those sort of things are what we're going to be tackling today. So hopefully this is as exciting as I am excited to talk about this sort of stuff. Now, firstly, before we dive in, just some really quick bookkeeping. If you have any questions at any point in time while you're watching this, please hit them up in the YouTube comments. This game is very complicated, so if there's something that you think is obvious that's not addressed, or I misspoke, or any of the many things you could have questions for, please just hit me up in the YouTube comments. I'll respond to that as soon as possible. And secondly, if you want to take a second just to like this video, if you appreciate this sort of content, it's greatly appreciated. It helps support the channel more than you know. Also, if you want to subscribe to the channel, share this with a friend. There's a lot you can do to help support the channel. It's greatly appreciated. And with that, let's dive right in. The deck that we're playing today, our corporation deck, is the Built to Blast deck. And this is a deck that we did a whole video on. Again, you can watch that. The first 50 minutes explains the deck. We'll be explaining the basics on it, but this is what I would call a modernism deck. That is not a name of an archetype you really need to know. Interestingly enough, that archetype is over 10 years old now, which is pretty wild. But in short, it's a Wayland Rush deck that does often want to score to 7 points as quickly as possible, and it can take some risks and can push itself forward very aggressively because we have in our back pocket a kill combo. So the idea is that maybe the runner can keep up with us. Maybe the runner can crack our remote server and steal our agenda, but the whole time they have to do that, they have to respect this additional threat that we have that's on most board states going to be something they need to concern themselves with. And that is this very simple 2-card meat damage flatline combo, which is Public Trail. We're spending 6 influence on 3 copies of Public Trail. It says, play this only after runners made a successful run on their last turn, and they either pay 8 credits or take a tag. So if they made a run, we play one of these, hopefully they take the tag, and then we follow that up with End of the Line. End of the Line costs 3 credits, it removes the tag, and then it deals out 4 damage. So the idea here is none of these cards are technically bulletproof. They don't work on all board states. The runner can have more cards in hand. The runner can have more than 8 credits. But the short of the long is that we want to be playing as quickly as possible and aggressively as possible. We don't want to play super safe. We don't want to play hyper glacier as much as some of our ice can support that strategy. But we want to be playing at a pace where if the runner can get into a remote server to stop us quickly getting to 7 points, they might not be in the situation that they have at least 8 credits in their coffers, and they might not have at least 4 cards in hand. If they have 3 or fewer, we can flatline them. That's really important to keep in mind. We're not waiting for the runner to mess up. We're trying to force the runner to mess up. And the way that we can force the runner to play our game is by always having the lead, forcing them into our servers. If we're on game point, we put anything in the remote server and advance it, they largely have to run it. And that is the playstyle you need to embrace when you're playing this deck. It is a very different change. A lot of system gateway players, if you're just getting into this game, You're very used to playing a bit more slow and a bit more defensively, and this is the sort of deck that really forces you or really encourages you to play a bit fast and loose. Yeah, I know you can get in your mode server, but it's going to cost you 2 cards from your hand, maybe 7 credits, and if you can get in there and you choose to get in there, it's going to be the last time you're making a run this game. And that is something we definitely need to be keeping in mind at all points in this game. So you might have noticed by now, I've referred to Netrunner often with words like following and leading, and I think inherently a good way to look at Netrunner, specifically if you want to make your play more proactive, is looking at a game of Netrunner kind of akin to a ballroom dance. In dance, there's usually one person who's leading and then one person who's following, and a lot of times that's actually how a Netrunner game works out. We're going to have one player who's going to be presenting problems. They're going to be leading the game. They're going to say, this turn, this is what you have to deal with. And then the other player is going to be responding to that. If one player is constantly producing those problems, the other player has no option besides to react to board state. And forcing your opponent to always play reactively is actually inherently really good for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, there's this one specific article that was written about 25 years ago that you might have heard quoted many times before. And that's because this article actually gives a really good and really simple structure of how you can look at most 1v1 card games. Back in 1999, I believe Mike Flores wrote this article, Who's the Beatdown? Back in the day, this was on a website called The Dojo, which was a Magic the Gathering website where people published articles to talk about competitive play. And while that website did go under in the year 2000, it has been since reprinted and republished on other places, including Star City Games. And while this article is entirely containing references to the Magic the Gathering meta and certain cards of the 1999 era, of which I don't know much about Magic the Gathering, the whole thesis can largely be summed up in this first paragraph. Firstly, the article is titled, Who's the Beatdown? That's a very important question, and it reads like this. It says, the most common, yet subtle, yet disastrous mistake I see in tournament Magic is the misassignment of who is the beatdown deck and who is the control deck in a similar deck versus similar deck matchup. The player who misassigns themselves is inevitably going to be the loser of that match. There's a lot of terms here, and it goes on to explain with, again, Magic the Gathering stuff from 1999. The short of the long is, in Magic the Gathering, it's not really an asymmetrical game. Both players largely have the same win condition. Both players sit down with their deck, they shuffle up, they draw a hand of cards, and they have 20 life points. And you win if you can reduce your opponent's life points down to 0. So the simple idea here is if we have 2 players that both show up to a Magic the Gathering game with incredibly aggressive decks, they're aggro decks. All they want to do is reduce their opponent's life total from 20 to 0 as quickly as possible. Inherently, one of these players is going to be slightly better at doing that than their opponent. May that be during deck construction they built just a more aggressive deck in general, or more likely, one of them might just have drawn a better hand and might just have a more aggressive hand that can more quickly get that 20 life points down to 0. Now that means for the person who has the second best aggro deck in a 2-player aggro game, they're going to have a problem, because inherently they're not going to be as good at reducing their opponent's life points to 0 as the person with the better deck with the better hand. In short, if 2 players have the same goal, you need to be the person who's better at delivering that goal. And that is this whole idea with Who's the Beatdown. When we have 2 players that are both trying to do the same thing, and you realize, wait a second, I don't have the best aggro hand, you have to not be the aggro deck anymore. You have to become control. Control is the term used in Magic and a lot of card games, including Netrunner, in which your goal is not to blitz to your win condition, but your goal is to keep your opponent in check so that they do not win the game. Your win condition now in this matchup as the worst of 2 aggro decks is not to spend your damage going face to bring your opponent to 20 down to 0, but you want to spend your damage destroying your opponent's creatures and keeping their board state in control until ideally at some point they run out of threats and run out of pressure, and then eventually at that point in the game, you might become the beatdown and you might become the most aggressive deck at that table at that point, and then the rules will shift. So now you might be wondering, why are we talking about this when it comes to Netrunner? Netrunner is not particularly symmetrical, but the whole idea stands here, is that when I think of what a beatdown deck is in Netrunner, I think about the player who is leading as opposed to the player who's following. When we talk about the dance, the player who's leading is the player who's presenting problems. They're putting things on the table that are most quickly saying, if you do not deal with this, I will win the game. And so the other player, unless they can come up with a way to win the game even faster, they have to play control. They have to deal with the things we're putting on the table. Otherwise, the person who's presenting the problems is going to continue to present problems, and then you obviously have a lot of problems. This is something that is so important with this matchup, not only because of the deck we're playing always wants to be the beatdown, they always want to be leading, they always want to be presenting problem, but also because inherently right now, I think if you're playing a corporation in the standard format, you need to be the beatdown. You need to be constantly presenting problems. Just as an example, one of the most common openings when it comes to a lot of decks in the standard format is not ISA both central servers. Often the very common play for corporation play in the standard format right now is take something that matters, put it in a remote server on turn 1 and ice it also on turn 1. Central servers might be wide open, and that's totally fine. Because what the corporation is saying is on turn 1, the Rashida Yahim I have in the remote server is much more important than your 1 in 5 shot of getting an agenda on top of R&D. And this is the corporation largely becoming something akin to a beatdown. They're presenting a problem. The runner now has their whole 4 clicks, not to do ideally whatever they want, but maybe to deal with the Rashida, because Rashida is an issue. And while Rashida isn't exactly game-winning in many obvious ways, there's a lot of cards like this that can make a certain player at a table technically the beatdown. If a corporation has, say, a Res Holloman on the table, that is inherently a problem. And a runner cannot often think, I'm going to ignore that and try to win the game anyways. This is like the most beatdown a card can largely get in the standard format. And that's why cards like this are so important. And it's really great that you have more cards in your deck and Netrunner in general to put in remote servers to just make problems that the runner has to deal with. Now, the runner too also can be the beatdown, but it's actually less common. And very importantly, this is not at the beginning of the game we determine who is going to be leading, who's going to be following, but this can change based off of board states between turns, let alone within the same turn between actions. If the runner drops a cataloger and they're already on 3 points, yeah, that cataloger might single-handedly win the game. And now the runner is technically leading, because the corporation's next turn might not be, I'm going to ignore that and put agendas in their remote server and try and score them out. They might need to respond to that. So this is the sort of thing that I want you to keep in mind when you're playing your corp games, when you're playing your runner games, who is leading and who is following. It's really hard as the runner inherently right now in Netrunner to be leading as soon as turn 1. Generally, it means the corporation has to have a bad draw or something bad has to happen, but there's not a lot of cards right now in the standard format that on turn 1, if you don't address them as a corporation, you're going to lose the game. Keyhole, mind you, is a really old card. Stargate is the more balanced modern version of Keyhole, but like we used to have cards like this in the modern format where if the runner dropped the Keyhole in turn 1, whatever the corporation's plans were, they were entirely stopped because they had to address the Keyhole or they can lose the game in 2 or 3 turns. I'd argue for better or worse, the game is in a healthier spot, but generally as a runner, you're going to be playing control for the first couple turns. There's very few decks where that's not the case. And that is something you have to embrace as a corporation. If you're not leading, you're following. We don't want to be following. Now, also inherently, there is a bit of like side imbalance when it comes to this conversation. If I can put something in a remote server that the runner has to spend their next 2 or 3 clicks trying to figure out, they have to structure their turn trying to figure out how to answer the problem I presented. If we don't present problems, the runner can do whatever they want. They literally have 4 clicks, and those 4 clicks, if they're not forced to be running and interacting and spending money, they can draw through their deck. They can set up for the mid to late game. And overall, right now in the standard format, you just simply do not want to let runners get to their mid to end game because there's many, many more cards in the standard format that scale better into the late game for runners than they do for corporations. This has been kind of the thing for really ever since Netrunner came out. But generally, there's this kind of graph to the power level of certain sides of the table. Early game, runners can run everything in theory. Corporations need to keep them out. Something like that still exists. In the mid game, corporations largely have their money and their ice, and runners are forced to solve the problems, find their breakers. But as the game goes longer, it gets more and more runner favored, where cards like Turbine can come down and all your ice gets broken for pennies. They have all their breakers. They have their economy. Their twinning is getting power counters. They're multi-accessing R&D for 3 cards every turn. In short, that's another big reason why you do not want to let the game go long. And as a corporation in the standard format right now, again, 9 out of 10 times, you need to be leading and you need to be leading relatively quickly. We have a good replay to show you how that works. So throughout this replay, we're going to keep those things in mind. We always want to be leading. If we're not leading, we're following. And if the runner's following, they're forced to play our game. We control the tempo of the game. They're forced to answer our problems that we're presenting. And if we're not forcing them to solve our problems, they have all the time in the world that they need to draw through their deck, to find their breakers, to set up their economy, their multi-axis, and all the sort of stuff that we inherently don't want them to do. It's a very important change for some players of how they play the game. A lot of players who come from System Gateway, their first turn is ice up both central servers, and that is exactly the opposite playstyle we want for a deck like this. We want to be presenting problems, we want to be being offense, not defense. Now, the last thing we want to talk about before we go into this replay, I always want to talk a bit about who we're playing against and what we expect from them. A big thing with Netrunner is the more you play the game, the more you will become familiar with the card pool. It's a really daunting thing to play against a criminal and not know the criminal cards, because you don't know what to play against. And while there's obviously a lot of criminal cards, more in the standard format than in startup, there's a lot of stuff to learn. We're going to try and keep this as approachable as possible. We're going to only be shouting out 2 ideas, 2 cards largely that we're going to be playing around, so we can keep this as, again, manageable as possible. The more you play, the more this will become second instinct, the more you see these cards and see how they interact, but we're going to keep this down to 2 cards. And the first one is the idea that criminals are very, very good at dealing with 1 piece of ice. This is something that we're expecting. We're playing against Mercury, mind you. Mercury is not a very common identity you see in the standard format when it comes to competitive organized play, but Mercury doesn't want to be breaking subroutines. They want to be bypassing ice, derezzing ice, stuff like that, but largely bypassing ice, which makes sense. And again, we're talking about criminal, and the one thing we want to watch out when we're playing against criminal is, again, criminal is always really good at dealing with 1 piece of ice. So in a Mercury deck, there's a lot of options, but the one card we want to play around is the idea of Inside Job. Inside Job has been around for a long time, since the 2012 core set. I'm pretty fond of the original art that has Boris hacking away on the toilet. But the idea here is Inside Job says any remote server, even any central server, but mostly any remote server, if it has only 1 piece of ice, that's not enough. We pay 2 credits, we bypass the first ice we encounter, which means that inherently any server, no matter how great that ice is, even if we have no breakers, even if the runner has very little money, they can always get through a single piece of ice. And just to keep this in context, it's not just Inside Job. There's actually a ton of cards in the criminal card pool that all do a very similar thing, for better or for worse. There's Inside Job, there's S Debrato, it only works for central servers. I think Boomerang would be by far the next most popular card like this. It's a hardware that marks a piece of ice and breaks 2 subroutines on that ice, regardless of ice type or ice strength. But criminals are very, very good at dealing with 1 ice remote servers. For that reason, whenever I play against a criminal, I will always try and push out my first agenda behind 2 pieces of ice, unless it's like 1 piece of ice and a really good defensive upgrade. But if you put an important agenda behind 1 piece of ice as soon as turn 1, a criminal can almost always get in there. Boomerang, Inside Job are pretty common in most criminal decks, and we're expecting a whole bunch of Inside Jobs in Mercury. But that is the first thing we want to keep in mind when we're playing against criminal, is they're always good at cheating behind 1 piece of ice. You don't want to be caught unaware when you put an agenda behind your favorite ice in the whole deck and they just Inside Job it. So again, criminal, 1 piece of ice, not safe. All you want to do, get 2 ice on a server, be able to res both of them, because Inside Job only bypasses encountered ice, so that means you have to res it to stop the bypass. Second thing, and this one's a bit more nuanced, but I'm going to keep it as broad and straightforward as possible. This is diversion of funds. It costs 2 clicks and 1 credit, so it's a double, 2 clicks. Run HQ. If successful, instead of touching cards, the corporation loses up to 5 credits, and you gain as many credits as the corporation lost. Diversion of funds used to be a 3 of in every single criminal deck. And right now, that's sometimes less so. Whether Mercury's playing diversion of funds, that's another interesting question. But in general, a lot of competitive standard criminal decks are no longer playing 3 diversion funds all the time. Sometimes they're playing 2, sometimes they're playing 1, sometimes they're playing 0, but a lot of criminal decks are still playing 3. And speaking to you as maybe a newer or developing player, ignore all that nuance and just respect diversion of funds. Getting diversion of funds on turn 1 is one of the worst things you can do. Not because it's also just a bad thing to happen to your game, but it means turn 2, you're barely playing the game in Netrunner. If on turn 1, you ice up a remote server, you put something in it, you click for a credit, and then the runner's first 2 clicks, they run HQ, they take away all your money, you're down to 1 credit, they suddenly have 9 credits or whatever, then they just run your remote server, you can't res your ice, you realize you're starting turn 2 with 1 credit, maybe 0 credits, and that's really, really bad for you. Diversion of funds is just kind of not fun if you're not respecting it. It just takes your money away. And while diversion of funds is not that big of a metaphor, it's the sort of card that you just don't want to get blown out by on turn 1, because it makes the game really, really boring for the first couple turns, and you don't want that to happen. So how do you beat diversion funds? Just put ice on HQ. Always, when you're opening against a criminal deck, just put a piece of ice on HQ. It has to be one of your goals. There are certain board states where a diversion of funds isn't the worst. If you have a bunch of assets on the table, you can always res those assets when the diversion of funds comes through to duck the diversions. There's some board states where eating a diversion on turn 1 is fine, but for 9 out of 10 times as a criminal, just put a piece of ice on HQ. Even if you can't res that ice, your opponent doesn't know that. The runner can't just always diversion of funds, click 1 and say, I hope they can't res it. Sometimes that is the right play, but more often than not, it'll slow the game down to a point where the runner has to go find a breaker or a boomerang or some other alternate piece before they can just diversion you as soon as possible. So while you can spend a whole video talking about diversion of funds itself, your main goal as a newer player is don't just get doofed on turn 1. We call this doof. Don't get doofed on turn 1. It is just going to make your game miserable. Just always ice up HQ. And then eventually, once you get more experience in the matchup, you'll see the nuance of it. For now, just don't let the bad thing happen. Just ice up HQ for sure. And that's it. We're ready to dive in. We talked a lot about it. And again, our basic ideas we want to focus on. Firstly, for a criminal opponent, we're going to try and respect diversion of funds. I'm not sure if this deck is playing it. I don't actually think it is, but we're going to try and not get doofed on turn 1 because that is just a bad way to go. Secondly, criminals can cheat through a single ice. Almost definitely Mercury will because they're going to be playing a whole bunch of inside jobs, but we're going to try and not put something super valuable behind a single ice and think it's bulletproof, even if we see no breakers, because it's largely not. Next, when it comes to our Wayland deck, we understand our win condition is play fast and loose, score to 7, but at the same time threaten to do the meat damage combo. That's a lot of fun. And then of course, if we're not leading, we're following, and we're not following. We want to present problems. We want to keep the runner as busy as possible. Those are our main caveats when we're going to be looking at this game. We're going to be going turn by turn, click by click, talking about our options, but those are the things that when you're watching this, I want to keep in mind. I think a really nice thing to do as well is if you're watching this on YouTube, of course, is we get our mandatory draw, maybe pause the video and discuss to yourself what you think you would do on that turn, then play the video and you'll hear me talking about what I think we should do on that turn. And then we can see how we disagree and we agree and for what reasons I'll explain why I think certain things are correct. So feel free to pause this video, talk it through, ask comments in the YouTube. Let's dive in. All right, we're built to last. We haven't talked really about the ability. We're playing 44 cards. Importantly, we have 8 agendas in the deck. So 1 in 5 is our agenda density on R&D. That's going to come up. That's really important in this match. We get money when we advance cards, so we want to be advancing cards. We can advance ice, and that's a very nuanced conversation. It'll come up throughout this replay, but mostly our advancements give us free money, which is sick. Mercury on the other side, once per turn, when they run a central server, if they haven't broken ice subroutines, then all of the ice in our deck strictly ends the run, so they have to have another way to cheat around the ice. They can't just let the subroutines fire and run R&D, because again, it will end the run. They get to see 2 cards. This is really interesting. Because Mercury can be a really scary matchup sometimes, because when you sit across from Mercury, you think Mercury is going to be that aggro deck. As soon as turn 1, Mercury can easily run R&D and see 2 cards and steal 5 points, and that can't happen to you, and it feels really bad. I'll be clear, I don't like the Mercury's design. I don't like bypass. I don't like this like early aggression payoff stuff. It's not my favorite kind of Netrunner. But this is the sort of matchup that's fascinating. Because while there's definitely a bunch of different ways to play Built to Last, and specifically Built to Last Hyper Glacier just won Worlds last year, we're a faster Built to Last than maybe your opponent can expect. A lot of people in this matchup sitting across from Mercury might be more scared of Mercury's aggression on turn 1 and might be threatened to ice at both central servers and say like, oh, I don't want to worry about that Mercury ability. I'm going to ice stuff down. And this is where it's so interesting in this matchup, because technically our opponent might not know that, but we are the beatdown. We are the aggro deck in this matchup. We are very close to having a kill combo as soon as turn 1. We have a public trail in our hand. If we draw that end of the line, of which there's 3 in 39, not the best odds, but we can get there. If we draw our combo, the runner can die as soon as turn 2. If the runner is aggressive and tries to send it as fast as possible and doesn't keep their cards in hand and their credits up, we can end the game really quickly. So this is just such a cool matchup because it's easy for a lot of players to think Mercury's the beatdown. Let's slow down and keep Mercury out. But we can stay ahead of Mercury, and we can make Mercury kind of be that second best aggro deck in an aggro deck versus aggro deck matchup and get caught unawares, which is exactly what we want to do. As a corporation first, we get a mulligan here. I think this hand is fine. It's a bit of a bummer that we drew 2 of the most expensive ice in the whole deck because we don't really want to pay 7 credits for an ice that's going to be inside jobbed anyways. But that's Charlotte, a really powerful card. Half our kill combo is really good. And if Charlotte gets sniped in the remote server, we also have Rashida. We have 2 of the best assets to put in a remote server as soon as turn 1 to accelerate the game. Again, we want to be the one who knocks. We want to be putting cards on the table. We want to be leading. We want to force our opponent to follow. These are very good cards to put in the remote server. I think we keep this. Very noteworthy, we're not going to be talking too much about the runner's play and their mulligan and that sort of stuff. We'll be talking about small stuff when it comes up, but we're largely going to be talking about our corporation's play and not Diogen's runner play. So we want to keep this. We'd love to draw a cheap piece of ice to put on the remote server to jam either the Charlotte or Rashida, and we'll go from there. Hi from Montreal, salut. And then we're going to keep. We draw a Hordem. So turn 1, what's our game plan? And I think this is actually quite an interesting turn. We have 2 things we can put on the table. A Rashida is a nice card to get early. That's money and card draw. That's one of the best things you can get on the table turn 1. We also have a Charlotte. Charlotte is a lot of value in Built to Last because every turn you advance her, you get money. And then if she survives, you get money and card draw, and you can do the whole thing over and over again. She is a really good engine because functionally every time the top fires, we spend a click to get 5 credits and a card draw, considering that Built to Last will be advancing a card with no advancements on it. That's really good. Now, our other thing we said on turn 1, the most important thing we can do is ice HQ so we don't get diversioned. So I think the easy line here is put a piece of ice on HQ. Even if we can't res it, we'll put a Pharos on HQ. We can put a Hordem in the remote server, and we can put Rashida in the remote server, and that's probably our turn. We can still res the Hordem, which is fine. The Rashida might go down. The runner probably should contest the Rashida, so we're forced to res the Hordem for what's going to functionally be 3 credits because it does have the mail-in rebate. But if the Rashida survives, we're in an okay spot. The Rashida doesn't survive, we can install Charlotte the next turn and try the whole thing again, but I think that's the most defensive line. I think there's also an option here. You can do Charlotte, advance Charlotte, ice up the Charlotte with the Hordem, and with money offloaded onto the Charlotte, if we do get diversion on turn 1, it's not a disaster. It's not great, but it's not a disaster. I think both of those plays are fine. I think the Charlotte one's slightly more aggressive, which is fun, but I do think if you're a newer player, don't exactly not ice HQ, you want to ice HQ. Don't get doofed, it's pretty bad. Now, you also might be thinking we're leaving R&D wide open, and we are. We're going to take some risks in this matchup. We are not going to play Hyper Glacier and ice everything down. Our plays in the remote server are so much better than the runner spending a click seeing 2 cards in R&D. It really is. Worth noting, we talk about numbers on this channel a lot. We have 8 agendas and 38, so that's a bit more than 1 in 5 cards. So if I'm not mistaken, if the runner runs R&D and sees 2 cards, that's about a 40% chance to find an agenda. Citation needed. Editor Andre will correct that, but we can take those odds, because our remote server is a bit more aggressive and it will accelerate the game a bit further ahead for us. So the corporation here does the Hordem play, Horlet, Charlotte advance. So getting some good money, 6 credits. The Charlotte survives, we have an engine. I also kind of like the Rashida first, because if we don't use the Rashida, she's not going anywhere for a couple turns because Charlotte will stay in the remote server, but we'll see how our runner responds to that. Open HQ, open R&D. Now open HQ here is actually kind of telling. And it's very important when you play Netrunner to think about what the things that you're doing, what they tell to your opponent, because inherently this is a game about information. We did not ice HQ and we did not mulligan. If we had a hand with 2 to 3 agendas, we'd definitely mulligan. If we had a hand with 1 agenda, we might keep it. But the fact that we didn't ice HQ, we understand that Mercury can run HQ and see 2 cards, means that there's probably not agendas in HQ. This is something that's more up to the runner to track, but it's nice to know what we think they know, because then that changes the whole dynamic. But that's very important. The fact that we didn't ice up central servers, firstly, that's free value for Mercury for sure. But I think if the runner runs HQ here, they're probably missing, because I don't think we have agendas in hand, because we probably would have considered icing that up. Again, we kept this hand. This seems to be a good hand. The Daijin's off. He starts by raindrops in the remote server. You don't see this in Criminal a lot, but that's actually a pretty great play. So now if we want to keep the runner out, we res the Hordem to protect the Charlotte. It's a bummer, because raindrops will be drawing cards and getting credits for the runner. Credits regardless, cards are dependent on this, but protecting the Charlotte seems important. So we're going to res the Hordem. It's going to fire. We're going to get a credit back. Charlotte's safe, and the runner draws a couple cards. From here, Daijin enters the door, comes back, installs a Melandrigem, and dirty laundries into R&D. Now, Melandrigem is really interesting. It's not a card you see a lot of, and inherently, it actually doesn't do anything on this board state. This only bypasses ice of 3 strength or fewer, and we actually have only, I think, 3 ice in the entire deck that fall into the Melandrigem camp until we hit that very interesting threat 4 threshold. Now, why is Daijin installing this? I'm not 100% sure. I'm expecting he's playing around SDS drone deployment, which is an agenda, a 5/3 agenda that you need to trash one of your installed programs to interact with. But inherently, you don't want to be installing programs that you don't need before you need them, because this is very expensive. Dirty Laundry and R&D is good, though, because we're going to see 2 cards. Looks like no steal, no trash. We've used the Mercury ability. Very important. This is so much easier to forget on Jinteki.net as opposed to playing in person. We have to remember that Daijin knows the next 2 cards we're drawing, which means he should have pretty good information for the next couple turns. So if we top deck an ice and then quickly be like ice R&D, something like that, the runner probably has full information of what that ice is. So we have to keep that in mind. Not only do we know the next 2 cards on R&D are not agendas, which is also very important, but we should have an idea that information is known, and that is very valuable. Now, last click here, Daijin does a window of opportunity for the remote server. This puts us in a rough spot because we can't re-res Hordem, So he's going to get in. This is just another card that fits into the sort of camps of criminals can get through a single ice remote servers, no problem. Just like the boomerangs, just like the inside jobs. Again, we need 2 ice sooner than later. And the Charlotte here, we can either force Diogen to trash it for 2 credits, or we can get 3 credits. And I think getting the 3 credits here is totally fine. So we're going to res it. Charlotte's going to leave, and we're off. We're going to mandatory draw. Fordham gets re-resed, of course. And now we're going to mandatory draw Carve the Diogen New. Do you notice something here? Our game plan is working. Diogen has made a successful run. He has fewer than 8 credits, and he has fewer than 4 cards in hand. We have the public trail here. Mind you, if we had the end of the line, public trail into end of the line is 4 plus 3, that's 7 credits. If we had the end of the line in our hand, we could do click for credit, public trail, end of the line, win the game. Now, that's not likely we have it. The chance of having 2 of those combo pieces in the first 7 cards in our deck is only, I think, 12%. It happens. We put a video up where we killed the runner on turn 1, or turn 2, technically, right? But Diogen is being aggressive. You also notice he plays a lot of events. This is a very event-heavy deck, so having a full hand of cards can be difficult. But you might notice this is why our play was so important. We forced him to spend his cards. We forced him to interact. We forced him to keep his money down. And if we have the end of line, we win the game. Any turn that we don't put a problem on the table is a turn that Diogen doesn't have to interact with us. And if we can't force interaction, that's another turn where we can't force him to respect public trail, end of line, and maybe lose the game as soon as turn 2. Now, it is our turn. I think Rashida is a really nice thing to put in server 1. We also probably don't have agendas in hand because we didn't ice HQ on turn 1, and he knows we drew a tree line. So here, I like the idea if we put the Rashida in server 1 to, again, force the issue. If we're not leading, we're following. We're always leading. We should ice up R&D, and a tree line's a nice cheap one. And I think here, we didn't get diversion of funds, which is pretty great, but we probably just want to put a piece of ice on HQ just to say, like, if there's a diversion of funds, Diogen's going to consider what it's going to take. Because even if we can't res the Pharaohs, it looks like there's ice we can res, and that means he can't just diversion of us, which try not to get diversioned. Corporation does a slightly different play. Tree line on R&D is great. They advance the tree line, and then they put the Rashida in server 1. So we're doing a great job at putting something in the remote server turn after turn after turn, which is exactly what you want to be doing. Now, this advancement on R&D, let's talk about advancements. Wayland, built to last. Whenever you advance a card with no advancements on it, you gain 2 credits. So you spend 1, you gain 2. So it's very similar to clicking for a credit, except you also get the advancement, and maybe the advancement will matter. You notice on this tree line, when we advance this ice, it becomes 5 strength. It does matter. If the runner wants to break this with most fractors, being 5 strength will cost the runner more credits. So this is technically strictly better than clicking for a credit. Now, this is not always strictly better for clicking for a credit. Firstly, the runner now knows this is an advanceable piece of ice. It shouldn't be any surprise right now to Diogen that that is the tree line we probably top decked, because that is the card he saw in R&D, and then suddenly an ice goes on R&D and it gets an advancement. So we're kind of screaming this is the tree line, which is fine. We don't have a lot of bad face checks into the deck, so it's not like we're hoping that he runs into something. They're mostly end the run stuff. We have some hammers, they're mean, but we've given full information of what this ice is. Also notably, with this board state, with just a Melandregem has no interaction until we hit threat 4, that it can be a deal with the tree line on 1 advancement versus no advancements. 4 to 5 strength does not change the math. Melandregem just simply can't deal with it. For those reasons, this tree line advancement for now is just simply akin to clicking for a credit. Maybe in the later game, it'll be a bit better once the breakers come down, and I'll give you a little hint, there's no breakers in this deck, but I think we don't actually need this credit right now. We're having a piece of ice on HQ, even if we cannot res it, is infinitely more valuable to force Diogen in a certain way. I think you can argue, though, that having an open HQ might be a nice way to goad Diogen, to goad the runner to make a successful run, and then maybe with the Rashida, we draw into the public trail and to end the line, and I think that's actually really worth keeping in mind. To some extent, having this sort of like honeypot of a server that we didn't ice is a way we could honestly win the game, and you have to realize that every once in a while. But overall, this tree line advancement is not the most important advancement. If we wanted to make sure we don't get diversion, this advancement is definitely less good than an ice on HQ on this board state, I reckon. But we'll see how Diogen interacts. The more we play against our opponent, the more we'll read how aggressive they are, and right now we're still in kind of the phase where we're trying to figure out what our opponent's about. Back to Diogen, draws up with a Blueberry Diesel, bravados into R&D. There's no face check on an advancement here that can be that bad for him. He's pretty sure it's a tree line. And here he'll see the top card of the deck and the following card of the deck, which is unknown. So we're going to go ahead and res the tree line. It ends the run, returns 1 credit. The bravado will give 3 to Diogen. And Diogen here doesn't have much to do. It's going to play Concerto. Not a card you see very often. It draws a card It reveals the card and then it makes a run, giving credits to use during that run equal to the cost of the card that was drawn. So specifically, we know, and this is easy to miss in the chat log, that Diogen drew a Bravado. So now he's running with 3 credits on this Concerto that he can use. Now, he inherently doesn't have any way to use this credits. If he found a trashable in HQ, so be it. And he's running HQ here. I would say that it's very unlikely we have an agenda in hand. Because if we had an agenda in hand, we probably would ice up HQ, let alone we maybe even just put the agenda in server 1 with a second piece of ice there to play around the inside jobs we've been talking about. But I think this is just more for information. At the end of the day, Concerto just draws a card. So if he was going to draw a card anyways, this is kind of comparable. But just keep that in mind, the information this gives, and this is not a huge value run, but he's going to get some information and some very important information here because he sees the public trail. I think when you play against a built to last deck, you need to figure out if it's Hyper Glacier, if it's a sort of public trail end of the line modernism deck like the one we published a couple weeks ago. So now Diogen should understand that if he wants to be aggressive and if he wants to not die to end the line, he needs to respect this public trail and keep cards in hand. So this information is actually pretty valuable. Information is important. And sees the Pharaohs, which of course he does. And then on 8 credits, he's totally safe. He has enough cards in hand. He has enough credits. Rashida survives, which is great. And we draw 3 cards and a mandatory draw. Okay, in terms of the cards we've drawn, Charlotte was actually the known card that Diogen saw when he ran R&D on turn 1. He dirty laundried it, and so he accessed the Charlotte with only 1 credit, so he couldn't have trashed it. He might have trashed it. I'm assuming most people would trash a Charlotte for 2. I think I would. But he knows that we have the Charlotte. Which means if we go install advance in server 1, he's pretty sure he knows what it is and it's not an agenda. And sometimes that's actually valuable information. If we know that Diogen knows this and then we draw an agenda as well, we could install advance and it looks like a Charlotte and maybe he won't contest a Charlotte. The biggest bummer right now about this is that we didn't draw an agenda. Because if we drew an agenda, I think our play is install agenda, advance that agenda, make money off of built to last, and then put a second ice on server 1. Because of course, we play around 1 ice because criminals beat 1 ice. And this is the sort of idea that we want to play fast and we want to play loose. We're not a Glacier deck. We don't have to ice up everything in a perfect way. Now, ideally, we should have a piece of ice here just because diversion of funds will be a problem. If they do diversion of funds inside job remote server, we might not have the money to res our outermost piece of ice, let alone score the agenda out. So that is, again, why I like the ice on HQ a turn ago. We can still do it now. But at least here we have the Charlotte to jam. If we drew an agenda, I would recommend pushing the agenda, but I like the play here. Charlotte, advance, and just put a piece of ice on HQ. What do we put on HQ? Honestly, probably the Pharaohs and just not res it for a bit. Now, boarding control, you can put on HQ. More often than not, I like it on server 1 because the ability at instant speed to end the run after the runner's paid through all that ice on that server or used their inside job to cheat through that ice. When we know there's an agenda in server 1, we know when to use the boarding control more often than not. You get a lot more value on the remote server. It makes the remote server harder to contest, and we're going to need to score agendas in the remote server. So here, I think Charlotte advance, just put the Pharaohs on HQ and not plan to res it for a minute until it really matters is likely the line here. If we drew an agenda, we might actually push the agenda. And our corporation does it, which is great. Notice this, 3 turns in a row. We've been leading 3 turns in a row. All 3 turns of this game, we've been putting something in the remote server and saying, how are you going to deal with this? And you notice on this board state with this hand, and we don't have open information when we're playing the game, it actually is hard to deal with this. He needs to draw into a little piece that will get through Hordem, and that's probably a boomerang or an inside job, and even if he does it, it's still a Charlotte. So we're making him spend resources while we're just kind of getting enough Charlotte value to feel okay about it. But always be leading. We don't want to be icing up centrals and just like playing Glacier when we can push the game out. Again, if he steps out of line and we draw our end of the line, the game can be over. We need to force him to keep up to us. Back to Diogen here. He draws up, gets a Concerto. He's running HQ. This is very interesting for a couple reasons. Firstly, we talked about Concerto revealing the card it draws. The 2 credits on Concerto are because, lo and behold, Diogen has drawn an inside job. This should be no surprise. There's inside jobs in the Mercury deck. And this is exactly the sort of card before the game we were playing around where we now understand anything we put in the remote server is not safe unless we put 2 ice on the remote server. Res the outermost, inside job bypasses that one. Res the innermost, which is the res Hordem, it'll end the run. So this is the sort of thing we're playing around, and we expect this in the Mercury decks, and now we know it's in hand. So we're going to play around that for 2 reasons. Very importantly, it's easy to miss this. It's all just in the chat log. It doesn't show it on the table, so just keep reading the chat log because it'll sneak in there for sure. Secondly, Mercury's running HQ. Now, notably, last turn we just fired a Rashida, which means we drew 4 cards. If you want to watch another replay review, we have a runner one called Find the Agendas, and we spend so much time talking about this divide by 5 rule. We're not going to dive too deep into it in this video. I'd recommend watching the other one, but the short of the long is most corporation decks, every 5 cards, one of those cards is an agenda. So anytime the corporation draws 4 cards, they're likely to have drawn an agenda by some heuristic there, which means getting pressure on HQ the turn after the corporation draws a lot is actually kind of likely to connect with an agenda, which is a good reason why we have here Diogen making a run into HQ. Now you'll notice something. We haven't seen a single damn agenda. There's currently 8 agendas and 33 cards in R&D. The density in R&D is like 1 in 4. The density in R&D is actually really high right now. And by this point in the game, we've actually expected to have drawn into 2 agendas already. And we haven't. So that's really interesting. And that's something that's going to come back. This game is actually a bit of a suffering of an agenda drought. And that's something that will just happen. And understanding that and playing around that is an important skill. But right now, it is not unlikely that there's an agenda in hand. However, if you dive a bit deeper into this, you'll understand that this is the last turn we iced HQ. Now, for the first 2 turns of the game, we never iced HQ. I would imagine that means, and especially because Diogen saw 2 of our 3 cards, is that we didn't have agendas in hand. Now, the Rashida fired. So the question is, how many agendas did we draw from Rashida? If we drew 1 agenda, it might just be there in server 1. If we drew 2 agendas, there might be 1 in hand. So it's up to you as a runner and also as a corporation to understand the sort of densities here. But the short of the long is that I don't expect this concerto to hit an agenda unless Rashida drew 2 agendas, which at this point in the game is not super unlikely because we're expecting to see 2 in the 11 cards we've gone through so far. So it's an interesting thing. Watch the runner video where we focus more on this, but trying to keep track of where the agendas are and what you expect the corporation, how to play if that certain amount of agendas in hand is a skill on its own that is incredibly important. Now, the question is, do we res a Pharaohs here? Now, I think the answer is no, we don't. Because this Pharaohs is really expensive. It costs 7. That's the most expensive ice in our deck. It drops us down to 1 credit. Now, we have some more money coming in with Charlotte, so we can rebound if the Charlotte survives. Even if she doesn't survive, we'll get 3 credits. And while this face check on this is technically mean, it does give Diogen a tag that he probably should clear. This drops us down to, again, very little money. This deck inherently, because we're a public trail to end a line combo deck, we almost always want to be floating around 7 credits. Because 7 credits is what it costs to play public trail and to end a line. So any turn that we end up on 2 credits, 3 credits, 4 credits, we cannot threaten our win condition. Secondly, we know there's no agendas in hand. The only thing that Diogen can do is get information and or technically trash the Spin Doctor even for free with the Concerto. But the main idea I want to focus on is you don't always want to res ice, and sometimes you don't specifically want to res ice. Diogen not knowing what this ice is for a later turn where he makes a play like plays a legwork or a diversion of funds, and he doesn't know that this is a big barrier that he might not be able to break with whatever breakers he puts on the table, that is actually super valuable. He doesn't know what sort of breaker or what sort of solution he needs to crack HQ when it actually really does matter. And on this run, it doesn't matter. So I think here we shouldn't res the Pharaohs. We should let him get in. He should see 2 cards. Maybe he trashes the Spin Doctor worst case, but then, hey, he also made a successful run. That puts us closer to the public trail and the line combo, which maybe we'll draw parts of that off of the Charlotte. Unfortunately here, the corporation reses, and this face check is still fine. It's annoying for Diogen that he has to clear the tag. That costs him a click and 2 credits. But this is just a very expensive res for us when we did not need to spend 7 credits. Having money is really important because most of your econ cards in the game cost you money to play, and we'll be making money back from Charlotte pretty quickly, but you generally don't want to be spending money for no reason. You need to have a reason to res that ice. Whether you're playing around Hermes and want to get this res sooner than later, you could argue this, but 7 credits just for the tag is not a very good trade for us here. So I'd imagine we shouldn't res this. Now, another big thing is if we res this card now, we're going to be dropping down to low credits. We'll be up to 5 with the Charlotte. But our game plan over the next turn, especially because we know there's an inside job in hand, is we need to get a second ice in front of this Hordem, and we need to res that ice. Which means our next turn play abstractly here is draw an agenda. We do install an agenda, advance an agenda, put an ice. And that is going to cost us some amount of money, in which if we res, unfortunately, the Pharaohs, we just simply don't have the money to make that play. So you always want to think about the next turn and the turn after. And if our game plan here on a macro level is put 2 ice on our remote server, we're going to need money for that. So unfortunately, paying 7 credits here to keep the runner out, which didn't actually matter too much, and giving the runner a tag, which 7 credits is a lot, is probably not the best use of our money on this turn. We can keep this face check for a turn where it might matter. Maybe he runs last click. Maybe he does a diversion of funds, hoping we can't afford to res this as an archer or something like that. It's just overall probably not the best use of our money on this turn. Now Diogen bounces. He clears the tag. And last click, he plays Carpe Diem. He doesn't get a mark so at the beginning of the turn, so he just finds out he runs archives. He gets the 3 credits, and he runs archives, and he touches archives. Really quickly, when we're not talking too much about the runner play, don't touch archives. It's actually super important in the standard format that you don't make runs for no reason. If there were face down cards in archives and we're peeking them to see if there's an agenda thrown out or just get some information on what the corporation isn't keeping in their hand, that is worth something. But making the run on archives and touching these 2 face-up cards does nothing for you besides invites bad things to come to your house. In the standard format, there's a bunch of Wayland cards that just say, oh, did you make a successful run last turn? Oops, bad thing happens. And there's just no reason to touch the cards. So get your Carpe Diem money, make the run, just check out, or just don't make the run. You just really don't want to be touching cards. There's just a bunch of cards like this in the format. Trojan Horse is another one. It doesn't really matter on this board state. It's just there's only punishment for making successful runs for no reason. There's no upside, especially when your turn's over. So keep that in mind. Now, it's back to us. Of course, we're going to res the Charlotte. We're going to rebound a bit on credits. 4 credits and a card draw is fantastic. We draw to an Atlas and to an end the line. Now, notably, we've drawn 2 very important cards. Some of the best cards we can draw in here. First, we've drawn our end the line. That means if we were on 7 credits, we can threaten Public Trail and to end the line. Now, of course, Diogen has more than 8 credits. He also has more than 4 cards in hand, so this is not lethal, but this is exactly why we want to keep the money up. But on the plus side, we have our combo in hand now, which means all we're trying to do now is make Diogen, make the runner overextend, so he ends his turn on fewer than 8 credits, fewer than 4 cards in hand. And what a better way to do that than pushing the next agenda. This is also what we want. We want agendas, because agendas gives us closer to game point. Game point means we can force the runner to run more aggressively. Again, we're not the one who follows, we're the one who leads. Now, if you ask me, the aggressive play here would be put Atlas in remote server, advance the Atlas, and put a piece of ice outside the Whoredom. Unfortunately, that line is actually kind of difficult to do because we did spend 7 credits on the Pharaohs. Imagine we went into this turn with 12 credits. We're totally safe. If we had 12 credits here, we could very easily put the Atlas, advance the Atlas, ice server 1. We have 2 ice, we can res both of them, so we can play around inside job that will stop that dead in its tracks. And then on the following turn, we can score out a 3-2 Atlas or a 4-2 Atlas to get you the Atlas counter, which you generally want to try to do. But because we spent so much of our money on the Pharaohs here, we probably have to slow down slightly, which again, that is a very important thing to understand your next couple turns, if we res the Pharaohs or not. So here we probably just want to set up for the following turn. So imagine we advance the Charlotte, we put an ice outside of the Whoredom, and then we're set up the next turn to push out the Atlas and respect inside job. Unfortunately, the corporation here is aggressive, which is something I actually applaud generally in this matchup, but it lines up really unfortunately when it comes to the known inside job, let alone the inside job that we're technically always playing around. Our corporation advances the Charlotte and then trashes the Charlotte. So that's basically a click to gain 4 credits. That's not bad. We need the money. And then just does install advance Atlas. We trash the Charlotte, which means that this card is better than a Charlotte, which means this card's probably an agenda. And while we should be constantly playing around the threat of inside job, unfortunately with the Concerto, we know there's an inside job in hand. So I'm expecting Diogen just to inside job server 1 immediately and steal 2 points. Now, sometimes that's the right play. If Diogen was on like 1 or 2 credits and he does that, there's a chance that Public Trail to end a line will close the game out, but he's on a healthy amount of credits. He's on a healthy amount of cards. It's unlikely that'll be his last turn. So that's not great. Now, this hand is relatively good. I think Pharaohs is an easy discard here because I can't imagine us playing another 7 credits for a piece of ice. That's incredibly expensive, especially when we want to keep our credits up for this sort of play. Unfortunately, the corporation here discards the Border Control. Border Control is a card that I don't think hits the table this entire game. And there's a chance our runner here is playing around the fact that Lalandra Gem beats Border Control. And it technically does. It is the only ice in our deck that's lower than 3 strength. But Border Control's ability is just so inherently powerful that Border Control on the remote server, let alone the fact that it just gets another thing in front of inside job, is just very, very good. It's one of our cheaper ice in the deck. We often don't want to put our Pharaohs on the outermost of server 1 so that it gets inside jobbed after we res it for 7 credits. But I think here we should probably throw this out. Now, unfortunately, inside job is what we should be respecting on all board states, and I think Diogen just sends it, which is probably correct here. Inside jobs around that Whoredom, steals an Atlas, no sweat whatsoever. A second piece of ice there would be a problem. Now, commendably, 4 turns in a row. We've been leading 4 times. We've been controlling the game. We've been forcing ourselves forward and forcing interaction unless Diogen says, I can't deal with that. And if you look at his hand's not that great at dealing with the remote server, which is something we can be capitalizing on and hopefully will be soon. Now, he continues to draw up twice and he installs an Asmonpula. And Asmonpula produces a knife. Things are getting interesting here. A card that I think is very easy to make players very scared and change the gears and change how they think the match is going. Diogen here is playing what he calls the thematic Mercury deck. Mercury, mind you, the character here in J. Chinyo that's assassinating multiple officials. Unfortunately, if you ask me, Mercury's idea and Mercury's text box is kind of anti-synergistic, or in fact just lacks any synergy, if you ask me, when it comes to Jaichinyo. Regardless, that's the idea, to make a thematic deck here. So we're going to see some multi-axis on central servers. We're expecting a lot of bypass, because eventually once you make enough runs, the knives will end the game. If Daogen can make 3 different turns in which he runs 3 central servers successfully and then gets the knives on the score area, he wins the game. This is cool, because a lot of players, once they see this Jaichinyo, they will change entirely how they play their game. They will start icing up central servers, they'll start playing Glacier, and they'll start playing the entire game respecting Jaichinyo, because they don't want to be assassinated, because of course they don't. And I love this matchup, because this is still that fundamental topic we talked at the beginning of the video. Who's the beatdown here? Between these two decks, who do you think has the faster chance of getting to game point? Us, who just has to force the runner to run and unfortunately get to fewer cards in hand or credits that Public Trail end of line closes the game on the spot? Or the runner, who needs to first install this Jaichinyo, make a bunch of runs, find the next Jaichinyo, install that Jaichinyo, make a bunch of runs, install that Jaichinyo. You see what I mean? It's so easy to be the one holding the knife and think that you are the beatdown, but in fact, we're not. And I think our best course of action against this Jaichinyo is to entirely ignore it. Forget it's there. Our win condition is to close the game way faster than even the second knife can show up. And we're very capable of doing that. We can build a 2-ice remote server, we have our kill combo in hand, and we just need to go at speed. Draw the agendas, push the agendas, it is that straightforward. That is something you need to keep in mind when you're playing against Jaichinyo. Some decks, if you play too slow, the Jaichinyo will catch up. Again, while making one central server really difficult to run can make the Jaichinyo stall out a bit, I think we entirely ignore it. At the end of the day, when 2 aggro decks meet up, we're the beatdown, and it's actually up to Daogen, I think, to play control here, as long as we can continue to thread that needle. It's such a cool matchup. So it's back to us. Mandatory draw, we drew Angelique. This card we haven't mentioned yet, but it's actually a very important card. Firstly, if the runner touches this when it's on the table, that's 2 meat damage, which means it's easier to do end of line to Public Trail. That's huge. But secondly, and very importantly, once we're on threat 3, we can spend 1 click on our combo turn to do 1 more damage, which means if Public Trail connects and the runner takes a tag and the runner has 4 cards in hand, they die. This hand will flatline the runner if we were on threat 3. Because unfortunately, Angelique's expendable ability to do 1 meat damage requires threat 3. So it's another reason why we just want to force the game forward, because once we get to threat 3, we can do Public Trail for a tag, Angelique for 1 meat damage, end of line for 4 meat damage. The runner dies with 4 cards in hand. Again, we are actually the beatdown. The runner showed up with a knife, we showed up with 2 guns, and 2 guns usually wins. So all we have to do is force the game forward. We are the one who leads. Now, this is really unfortunate. There's still 7 agendas and 30 cards. That's buck wild. We're like still, what is it, 1 and 4? Ideally here, we just find an agenda, we push the agenda, and we get ice in front of the Whoredom so we don't lose to a second inside job. My opening here is Spin Doctor on the table, draw, and then we'll decide on what we see. And the corporation sees that line, which is fantastic. Spin Doctor draws into no agendas. Such a bummer for 2 reasons. Firstly, they're all in R&D, and eventually Mercury will just inside job R&D because Mercury's running R&D because of Jaichinyo, maybe steal 2 cards. That's a problem. There's a lot of agendas in there. We also don't have anything to jam. We don't have anything proactive to put onto the table. That should not change the fact that we need to put something on the table. Because any turn that we don't put something in the remote server is a turn the runner can be like, oh, the corporation's not trying to win. I can just draw through my deck and set up. That's very important that we're leading, so the runner has to keep up with us. Here, we probably want to get a second ice on server 1 just to deal with the fact that we're going to need to do that sooner than later. I like the border control. And then in the remote server, we can either put the Spin Doctor because we're going to need to draw more cards. I think that's fine. Or we could even put the Angelique. Angelique, I think, is actually fascinating in this matchup. We have a second one. To some extent, we might not want to put Angelique on the table because then we can't expend Angelique. You can only expend Angelique from hand. But also, we could consider putting Angelique on central servers because we know the runner's going to want to run central servers, which means the runner's going to both make a successful run for Public Trail and then have 2 fewer cards in hand. So I think putting the Angelique just about anywhere is equally interesting. I think this is something a lot of players can like have different lines about, whether you put Angelique on HQ to bluff and upgrade, whether you put her in the remote server, whether you keep her in the hand. I think they're all both very fine. I think the most important thing here is we need more card draw because we want to close the game out sooner than later. So I would probably do Spin Doctor and then put a border control, at least the tree line on server 1. Now the corporation here does a bit of a midpoint. They put something in server 1, which is great. This is the next turn. I think 5 turns in a row we've been producing problems turn after turn after turn. That's so great. Unfortunately, the last click here is advancing the Whoredom. Now, advancing the Whoredom doesn't do anything. Whoredom only has text that's relevant once you put 3 advancements on the Whoredom. That makes the subroutines better, and it means that you can't break this with AI. Now, we don't have any intentions to triple advance the Whoredom, so advancing the Whoredom is exactly the same as clicking for a credit because the advancement is largely useless. Now, that means we're on 6 cards in hand, so we're going to have to discard a card. Here, the difference between us being on 11 credits and us being on 10 credits is not actually important. We can't even spend that much money over the next couple turns. Having money is good, but we have no ice to res. So having a credit is probably not as important as, and again, we've been talking about playing around that single ice cheat criminal idea, is that we'd probably put the border control or something here. Our corporation here throws out the border control. The corporation might be seeing, oh, Melandrigen beats it, so I don't want to put it on the table. But let me just promise you, border control is just a heck of a card. This is a much more powerful card. I don't think we want to play the Pharaohs that cost way too much money. Now here, the runner might want to worry about what's in server 1, but I'm expecting Diogen to play a bit of a setup here. He adds the Jaichinyo to hand and just installs it. He then puts down a Miss Bones and runs server 2, so that means he can get his Miss Bones money back if he trashes the Spin Doctor. What's really interesting here, and I think I've seen a lot of players just snap use Spin Doctor, is just make sure you're considering when and how you're using your Spin Doctors here. Now, if Diogen trashes Spin Doctor for no money because the Miss Bones money doesn't feel like it has an impact, but very notably, if we remove Spin Doctor from the game, the runner does not make a successful run, nor do they make an unsuccessful run. And why that matters is we actually want the runner to make a successful run. If we pop the Spin Doctor, Diogen doesn't make a successful run. In theory, if he trashes the Spin Doctor here and then just clicks for a credit or installs a card, we win the game. By removing our Spin Doctor from the game, we are removing the ability to potentially end the game on the following turn because the runner did not make a successful run. Now, in context, when the runner has 3 cards in hand and only 2 credits, it's very unlikely that Diogen is going to be installing a card. It's also unlikely he's clicking for a credit. The most likely play is that he'll draw a 4th card. So it's not actually that important, but it's something I just want to instill that before you pop the Spin Doctor, just kind of keep in mind, what does it do for the game? Now, if we want to trash the Spin Doctor, we can shuffle back up to 2 cards. And one of the questions with Spin Doctor is what you're shuffling back and for what reason. Here, honestly, what I'd shuffle back is probably the border controls. We ended up in this situation that we're trying to fix. So that probably is not what's going through the corporation's mind right here. They probably want to bring back things like Charlotte and Rashida. Charlotte feels really good and built to last. It's card draw and money. I think Rashida is actually a bit better here because all we need is card draw. We have enough money. We just want to find our agenda, so card draw is good. But I actually think allowing the runner to trash the Spin Doctor is probably the play here. And that's because, what do we want to draw next turn? We want to draw an agenda. If we shuffle these cards into our deck, it's less likely we're drawing an agenda, and we win here by drawing an agenda. Secondly, if we don't draw an agenda, we're probably going to put this Spin Doctor on the table to try and draw for an agenda. And then we can use the second Spin Doctor to shuffle back the first Spin Doctor, which overall will give us a bit more flexibility throughout the game. So seeing what your next turn is and realizing if the Spin Doctor goes, we have a second Spin Doctor, and we're going to Spin Doctor the Spin Doctor back because these cards they're good cards, but they're not exactly what we want right now. That's the sort of heads up, play with intention sort of stuff that we want these replays to kind of instill. So in short here, for 2 big reasons, I actually don't think you crack the Spin Doctor. Firstly, to force the fact that Diogen could lose the game on this turn if he just clicks for a credit or installs a card. I don't think that's incredibly likely, but wait, that's an out we'll play too. And secondly, I don't honestly think we want to draw any of these cards right now. I think maybe Rashida, but maybe Rashida's probably not enough. When we have a second Spin Doctor, we can shuffle this Spin Doctor back. Now the corporation does the shuffle back. I think we go for 2 Charlottes. They go back into the deck. So now there's 3 Charlottes and 30. Do we want to draw a Charlotte? Do we want to draw an agenda? We'll figure out how that matters throughout the game. And Diogen did not specifically make a successful run, so we cannot public trail. Here he draws up, which means, okay, that's what we expect to do anyways. So public trail into end of line wouldn't have been lethal. It would have if we had the Angelique in hand and we're on threat 3, but it's back to us. He's on 2 credits, 4 cards in hand. We have such a big window to force him to deal with our remote server, to force him to public trail end of line combo and close the game out. We are not scared of this knife. Now here we draw Charlotte. Could have been one of the Charlottes we shuffled back. We'll never know. But here we actually have 2 interesting lines. The first line is install Spin Doctor, draw 2, hopefully get an agenda, install the agenda, ice it up. We want 2 ice. We want an agenda. We want to force the runner to run. We specifically want to force the runner to run into this server because this server hurts the runner and it's more likely that we'll get a kill combo, but we want to get an agenda now because we are the one who knocks. We want to force the runner to follow our lead. Now the second line is a bit more conservative, slightly slower, is we can install Charlotte, advance the Charlotte, and then ideally put maybe another ice on server 1. Now, that is an interesting line because it looks like we have an agenda in server 1, which is what you've expected. We have now drawn through 15 cards. We've gone from 29 from 44. So we're expecting to be about 3 agendas in the game. We've Spin Doctored back 2 non-agendas. So if there's any agendas in HQ, they're still in HQ. Cycling does kind of break up that what expected to be seen by what point in time. So if we do Charlotte advance in server 1, there is a big chance that it looks like an agenda. What's wild is we've been talking about inside job and playing around inside job, but we actually don't want to play around inside job if we put Charlotte in server 1. Because if Diogen inside job server 1 thinking that's an agenda, yeah, he gets through the Whoredom, but firstly, Charlotte is not an agenda, and then he hits the Angelique that does 2 damage. He's now made a successful run, and he's now going to die to public trail end of the line most likely. So what's wild is that while we don't have the agenda, we actually want to make it easy to get in, but while we have the agenda, we want to make it tougher to get in. I kind of like the line here that we just do Charlotte advance, maybe even double advance, and just say, let's see what you're going to do. If he runs it, he runs it. We probably win the game. If he doesn't run it, we still have a Charlotte, and then hopefully we draw an agenda. Then we can do install, advance, ice it up. That's our line, and I think it's fascinating. The whole sort of bluff idea is super important because the biggest thing we want to do is force Diogen to interact, and specifically on terms which we don't expect him to survive. Now, our corporation player here does push the Charlotte, but after icing it up, so install advance here, this is actually making the Charlotte safe, which on the board state, we want the Charlotte to be slightly risky because if Diogen does make a successful run on here, he's probably going to flatline. So maybe we made this sweeter. Maybe we're expecting Diogen to do like boomerang inside job and have like a 2-card combination that challenges the remote server, but we honestly might have made the server too hard to run. Otherwise, though, we are still setting it up. If the Charlotte draws into an agenda, we're in a good spot with 2 ice and a defensive upgrade, or an offensive upgrade more accurately. So no matter what, if he doesn't run this, we'll still have something to push to try and make the game get closer to 7 points for us. Back to Diogen, he's on 2 credits. I'm not really worried about what he can do here. He starts to draw up, he clicks for a credit, he bravados R&D, which is just a trade of money for both players. We gain 1, he gains 3, it's fine. He needs money. This is the only way he gets money in this hand. And then he installs an alarm clock. And we're back to that same question of who's the beatdown deck. Firstly, the corporation, we're going to res the Charlotte. We're going to draw 2 cards and 4 credits off the mandatory. We still haven't drawn a damn agenda. This is alarm clock. Again, this is the matchup where the runner is playing Mercury. The runner's put down a knife, and the runner said, I'm running HQ, you cannot stop me. And still, who do you think the beatdown deck is here? Is it Diogen, or is it the built to last? We want the runner to successful run. We want the runner to spend half their turn bypassing a Pharaoh, seeing no agendas because it won't public trail end of line. We want the runner to feel like they're the beatdown deck when they're not. Because again, when 2 players are playing an aggro deck, 1 player needs to change lanes. Because if they are the slightly slower aggro deck, they're going to lose the aggro matchup. So here, we didn't find an agenda. I think we just need to get an agenda into server 1. Because we're pretty sure that Diogen's going to spend his next part of his turn running HQ with alarm clock, because at this point we've definitely drawn an agenda, right? 7 agendas in R&D is pretty weird. And we just want to force in the remote server. And if he spends most of his turn running and making a successful run, it's very likely we'll do public trail to end the line and close the game out. So here, our goal is probably open with Spin Doctor, draw 2 cards, hopefully find an agenda, install advance in server 1. Unfortunately, the corporation here respects the alarm clock. And we're specifically in a really cool situation where we should not respect the alarm clock. Corporation here ices up HQ with the most expensive ice in our deck. It's a Pharaohs. It's 7 to res, advances the Charlotte, and puts a Spin Doctor on the table. This is kind of similar to where the Charlotte was last turn, where we actually kind of want to make a honey pot. We want to force the runner to interact with us. And saying that we respect the runner, that we're going to put a second Pharaohs so they can't run HQ and spend half their turn running HQ is the opposite direction of where we want to go. The corporation here is playing the way that you would play if you were playing like a slower, maybe a Glacier built the last deck. Diogen has presented a problem, and we have presented a response. We said, oh, you're forcing the narrative of the game. We're going to respond to the narrative of the game. So this Pharaohs on HQ is the control play. Now, of course, we have no agendas in hand. We, in fact, want to make the runner make a successful run. Notably, the second thing here is barring the Spin Doctor in server 3, which largely looks like a Spin Doctor. We would not put an agenda on the table like this. Maybe it's a Rashida. Is that this is the first turn in the whole game which we have not been leading. We have not put a card on the table. We haven't really changed our board state in a way that Diogen has to respond to us. This is the first turn where Charlotte is just still Charlotting, and Charlotte is an annoying problem you might want to have to deal with here. But it's the first turn that, barring the Spin Doctor, we are not really forcing a threat that Diogen can respect. Diogen here can just do whatever he wants because we're not that much closer to winning the game. Obviously, the Charlotte's a bit fascinating here, but that is very notable. This is the first turn that the tables are really shifting, and they don't need to shift. I still think we're the aggro deck here. So beginning of the turn, Diogen is going to use alarm clock, run HQ. I think the Pharaohs on HQ, that's okay. I think if we don't res the Pharaohs on HQ, Diogen's going to click through this Pharaoh, spend 2 clicks on the turn. That's what Alarm Clock does. And then access cards that don't matter. And then maybe die. Now, he will very likely see the end of the line and then realize, okay, I just need to make sure I have 4 cards in hand. That is going to be a problem. But at the end of the day, he still spent half his turn getting an access that didn't matter. Now, the corporation here reses the Pharaohs. We've now spent 15 credits getting 2 ice on HQ, which is a server that really hasn't had an agenda for a long time. In fact, we've only drawn 1 agenda all game. Notably weird. Notably very, very weird. So now Diogen can decide to double click through the Pharaohs instead of taking the tag. I think that's about fine, right? Clearing a tag is a click and 2 credits. So you spend 2 clicks getting 2 credits, clearing the tag for free. Like, it's okay. So he's going to double click through this. Obviously, this Pharaohs will end the run. At least we spent 2 clicks of his turn and slowed him down. But now this server is something that he can't really run. Now, part of the corporation decision-making here might be the respect to Jachinho, where we don't want to allow those cheap runs on central servers. But again, we are the beatdown deck. If Diogen gets too aggressive and runs all central servers, it's very likely we can win the game here. Now, I believe Diogen's going to drop once, so he has 4 cards in hand, 5 cards in hand, doesn't check the Spin Doctor on the table, which is fine. We're not expecting this to be an agenda or Rashida, and it's back to us. Charlotte, draw, gain 4, no agenda. This is weird. This happens. This is obviously an outlier. We've drawn through 20 cards, just about 19 cards. We're expecting to see about 5 agendas. We've seen 1. That is noteworthy. Firstly, there's 7 agendas and 25 in R&D. We're getting to the 1 in 3 threshold. That is an issue. If Mercury ever runs R&D and sees 2 cards, they're very likely to walk away with an agenda. And that's obviously going to be a problem. Notably here too, we want an agenda. Because we have a remote server that's barrier into code gate, we see no real breakers. Melandrogem has no text on this board state. We have the Angelique, we have the kill combo in hand. The most important thing here is just to start getting to game point to force Diogen to keep up to our speed. Here, I open with the Spin Doctor, draw 2, see if I find an agenda, install advance, maybe put a 3rd piece of ice. That's the way I see it here. I think the corporation does something that's unfortunately a bit less on tempo, a bit slower, a bit more on the glacier side. And again, not embracing the whole idea of we're leading to force the follow. Corporation here plays the hedge fund to gain 4, advances the tree line, which in this board state with the Melandrogem doesn't actually do anything. It gives you more than a credit, but it's akin to clicking for credit. And of course, advances the Charlotte. Now check this out. At the beginning of the turn here, we had 13 credits. We can't spend 13 credits on this board state very easily. Tree line, if we want to res it, cost 4. That's true. Angelique costs 2. And our kill combo public trail at the end of the line costs 7. That's just about all our money. This is something that I see a lot of players run into, is the fact that you have access to money often forces players to feel like they should play the econ card. But here, our priority is not being on 19 credits. What we can threaten on 19 credits versus what we can threaten on 13 credits, the Venn diagram is a circle. There is not a lot we can do with the extra money in this matchup. We've rezzed almost all our ice besides 1 piece. We're not worried about any sort of credit denial potentially. Maybe one of our ice gets derez. That's the worst case, I imagine. But at the end of the day, if you have access to economy, doesn't mean you have to play economy. And I get this. This happened all the time, especially when I was a newer player. You draw hedge fund. Hedge fund is such a good card to draw. Yeah, click for 4 credit button. That feels really good. You have to watch out because there's a lot of board states where spending your click having 4 extra credits, let alone spending a click to advance the tree line, which is just getting 1 credit, is not worth it because we don't actually need money on this board state. We just need agendas in the remote server as soon as possible. I think the thing on top of that is that if we spend this whole turn and do nothing besides get economy, is we're not leading. This is the 2nd turn in a row that you'll notice we have not presented another problem that Diogen has to deal with. And if we're not constantly presenting problems, Diogen can find his inside jobs. He can find his other Jachinhos. He can click for credits. He can do whatever he wants. Now, admittedly, Diogen's deck doesn't look like it'll scale into the late game like a lot of other decks with like your companions and multi-axis and your turbines and all that sort of late game nonsense. But at the end of the day, we basically gave him a carte blanche, 4 clicks to say, do whatever you want. Our board state's the exact same as the turn prior, except we have 6 more credits plus a Charlotte coming in, which is not a big difference. And again, we just want to force the runner to deal with us. Diogen here draws up a bit, bravados into the remote server. This forces us to res, which now that we've advanced this card, he's pretty sure he can bounce into it. It's probably a tree line, maybe a Whoredom. And that's why advancing sometimes is a downside. If this wasn't advanced, he might have to respect a hammer, stuff like that. But we res a tree line. We res it for 3, getting the credit back. Bravado bounces. He checks the Spin Doctor, which we're going to res. Draw no agendas. Pretty wild. It's 1 in 3 on R&D. Do we want to shuffle the agendas back with the Spin Doctor? Notably, Diogen has cards in hand. He has 7 credits, let alone Miss Bones will trash this. Now here, I would probably shuffle back the 2 border controls, but I probably wouldn't have discarded the 2 border controls. But border control is just a very, very powerful card, because imagine getting through this 2 ice and then having to do it again. That's really difficult. I think the runner here shuffles back the money. Also, very importantly, with Spin Doctor, you can return up to 2 cards. So you can return 0, you can return 1. And I think top decking the hedge fund is actually a really bad top deck. This is the same sort of idea from the turn before, that hedge fund, it's just comfort food. It feels like the good thing you want to be doing on all turns, but right here, it's a pretty bad draw. Us going from 16 to 20 has no fundamental change on the game, where we want to be drawing agendas, maybe another piece of ice, maybe another kill combo, definitely another copy of Angelique, but there's a lot of other cards we want to be drawing. Sometimes you just want to get more cards in R&D to dilute the agenda density here, but we're actually at the spot that we just kind of want an agenda immediately to put into server 1. So we're going to shuffle back again, hedge fund and Rashida, so the economy plays, and admittedly a bit too much economy. And then Diogen just draws up, discards a second copy of Mistbones. It's back to us, Charlotte. We're going to draw 2 cards, and we've seen no agendas. We've seen no agendas. We've seen no agendas. There's 7 agendas in 23. We did shuffle 2 back here. We've drawn the Audacity. This card we haven't talked about so far. This is a very important card. This is our 0.5 of a win condition. This card says trash all cards from HQ and place a total of 2 advancement tokens on up to 2 cards that can be advanced. The way that we play this is we play 2 advancement tokens on the same card. So we take a 3/2 agenda, we install it, we advance it, we gain 2 credits from built to last, and then we Audacity, we throw out our whole hand, and we fast advance a 3/2 agenda. We generally don't play this in the early game, but what we want to do in this deck is rush to 5 points, and then we score our 7th, 6th, and 7th point from hand with the Audacity. This is just such a powerful card, because it means once we get to game point, we can thread the game out on all points in time. This is a very good card that we have drawn. So we want to hold on to this, because this is our win condition once we get to 5 agenda points. Now here, we still want to find an agenda. Diogen is still only on 7 credits. He's barely been over the 8 credit mark for Public Trail. So we probably have a good window here to jam into server 1 if we can find an agenda. I would still install Spin Doctor, use our 3rd Spin Doctor here to draw 2, hopefully find an agenda, install, advance in server 1, force the issue. We need to be leading. We have not been leading for the last 3 turns. We've just been getting money, advancing Charlotte, and we need to force the runner to interact with us, because if they don't, that's more time for him to draw up to gain credits. Now here the corporation installs a Spin Doctor, ices up R&D, hammers a good piece of ice there, that's for sure, and then advances the Charlotte. So unfortunately, how different our first 5 turns have been for just about our last 5 turns. On the first 5 turns of the game, turn after turn after turn, we've been jamming, but now unfortunately we've kind of been hypnotized by this unending value of Charlotte, and we've been spending our time advancing Charlotte as opposed to pushing ourselves forward and forcing interaction. You have to be careful with Charlotte. You don't always want to be Charlotting. You want to be jamming in agendas, specifically for this sort of deck, because right now the runner's actually doing a relatively good job at playing a Glacier deck, and we're not a Glacier deck. We're a Modernism deck. We want to go fast. Here we have to discard 2 cards. I think I would discard the second into line and a Rashida. I don't think we're likely going to need a Rashida. Most of our deck is agendas. We're hoping to draw into what we need very, very quickly. And we definitely want to hold on to Audacity, the Public Trail to end of line. Unfortunately, here the runner does throw out, while the end of line is correct, we don't often need 2 end of lines. You could consider keeping it and throwing out 2 Rashidas if they throw out the Audacity. You almost never want to throw this out, especially with 2 Spin Doctors out, and this is our 3rd Spin Doctor. You could argue with the 3rd Spin Doctor, you can shuffle back the Audacity here, but this card is just a very, very potent win condition once we're on 5 points. So you want to hold on to this, because once we get to 5 points, 3-2 just closes the game out under the nose of the criminal. Back to Diogen. We haven't really changed our board state besides server 4, which again looks like a Spin Doctor. We're going to check it. We're going to res. We're going to finally find an agenda. It's an Oaktown renovation. We'll take it. There's 1 agenda in the top 23 cards, but we found one. So next turn we can do install advance. Do we force the runner to trash the Spin Doctor? Here, at a minimum, I would shuffle back in an Audacity and a border control. Looks like we shuffle back in a border control and the end of line. Diogen now is just drawing up, raindropsing archives just to see 2 cards here, making a successful run and clicking for a credit. So we finally have a play. Diogen's on 10 credits, and that's only because we forced him to do nothing for the last 3 or 4 turns. And while his criminal deck doesn't have a robust economy, he's just been going up in credits. And we need to force him every turn to go down in credits, which means we need to be forcing things onto the table. Now, very interestingly here with Charlotte, we know what our turn is going to be. Our turn is probably going to be install, advance, the Oaktown in server 1, or install, advance, and then put a 3rd ice on server 1. Both of those are totally fan plays. But that actually means Charlotte here, we don't want to do the top text. The top text says when your turn begins, you may remove 1 host advancement counter to gain 4 and draw a card, or we could just trash Charlotte to gain 3. And here, the difference between 3 and 4 doesn't really matter. When we go from 23 to 24 credits, that's largely the same. And I'd argue that we probably don't want to draw another card. You could say drawing another card is fine if you think the agendas are safer in HQ than they are in R&D, and to some extent, a sneak door beta, a card we haven't mentioned yet, but that could show up in a Mercury list, that could be a problem. But I think here, we actually don't want to be drawing that much more. I think we could just take 3 and not have to discard too many cards and make sure that HQ doesn't flood up. Because potentially with the Charlotte and mandatory draw, we could draw 2 more agendas and then suddenly we're holding 3 agendas. Not the great spot to be. Now the corporation here does draw 4 and draws a second agenda. Is a CityWorks project. That's a very mean agenda. This one will come up. It's quite important. We've also drawn our Angelique. Angelique is huge because now that we've drawn her, as long as we're on threat 3, we have a 5 meat damage combo with Public Trail, Angelique, and the line, as long as Diogen has fewer than 8 credits. Here, I would do install Advanced Events the Oaktown or install Advanced Ice the Oaktown. Both of those are totally fine. And just get them on top of server 1 and say, if you run it, that's fine. You'll spend money. You'll get hit by the Angelique. We'll probably close the game out after that. And otherwise, we're getting closer and closer to game point. Corporation here, unfortunately, gets once more kind of mesmerized by that unending value of our friend Charlotte and advances the Charlotte. Advancing Charlotte and cracking Charlotte is akin to playing hedge fund. And as we said even 2 turns ago, we don't really need more than 25 credits. We don't need more than 30 credits. Advancing Oaktown already gives you money on its own. It's just such a cool agenda, but there's literally no way in this game that we can spend that many credits. So just try and keep in mind whenever you're playing Netrunner, it's very easy to get in a situation where you see money, play money, but there's a lot of board states in which money doesn't change the game and you have enough money. And I think here we definitely have enough money. So we are just losing clicks that don't actually impact the game. So Charlotte gets trashed. We do Oaktown advance. Now, notably, a lot of times the scoring patterns for 4-2 agendas, 5-3 agendas, and 3-2 agendas seem a bit kind of stuck. A lot of times if you see a 4-2 agenda, you'll do install advance. And then on the following turn, you'll do advance, advance, advance and score it out. But you'll notice on the second turn where you do advance, 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 that's your whole turn. That makes 2 things happen. Firstly, if you're on 5 cards in hand, you mandatory, you're on 6 cards in hand and you discard a card. That's not the end of the world. Again, discarding cards is not the worst thing. But if instead with a 4-2, if you have the time and space and security to do something like install advance, advance, on the following turn, you can do advance, advance, score, and then have a click left. And having a click left can be very valuable because it means if we draw an ice and then there's some threat that Diogen puts down, like a sneak door beta that's surrounding archives, we at least have a click to respond to him. Or if we draw a card like another 3-2 agenda, we can put that in server 1. So while it might not be strictly correct on this board state, just keep in mind with your agendas is that you don't always stick to this game's scoring plan and realizing what am I going to do next turn? And specifically if we're trying to make the board state difficult every turn by leading. And mind you, this is the first turn that we've led in the last couple turns. Sometimes having that extra click after you score to push the next agenda is the most important thing. Now here I do actually like install advance Oaktown, and instead of doing the Charlotte stuff, we put a 3rd ice here. Because there's ways, especially because he knows exactly what ice is on this remote server, that he can get in here if he has the right tricks. Having 1 ice also means there's a bit of uncertainty. So Diogen doesn't know what he needs to break the server. Currently, he knows what he needs to break the server, and getting a bit of uncertainty there can be super valuable. Corporation here discards. I would end up discarding probably 2 Rashidas and a Hordem. Why am I throwing out Rashidas? I don't like trashables in my hand. We're probably not going to need the Rashidas because most of our deck is agendas anyways. We're not going to be needing to draw a lot. But if the runner ever runs HQ and trashes our cheap trashables and then returns, there's just going to be more agendas per card because we'll just have fewer cards in hand. A lot of times in the late game, I'll get rid of the trashables in hand because they're just a liability in our HQ. So we throw out here Hordem, we throw out Hammer, and we throw out Rashida. The Hammer's a really good piece of ice. It's just kind of frustrating to deal with, but I think that's totally fair. We want to keep the Angelique for sure. We want to keep the agenda. We want to keep our kill combo. The question is whether Rashida is better than ice. I like the ice. Ice is a nice way we can respond if, say, an archive threat comes down. Back to Diogen. Do you think you can run through the server? Currently, Melandra does literally nothing. So he might poke R&D, but that's the worst we're expecting. Blueberry Diesel to draw. He draws some more. He plays his console. He plays another Melandra, which is entirely useless on this board state until we hit threat 4, which we're going to happen. So he spent his turn building up, which is what we expect. We've presented a problem. Swift is coming down. No surprise. He wants to be running a lot for Jaichinyo, but notice how we're not scared of this Jaichinyo. This is not happening anytime fast. We're currently the beatdown deck. We just need to keep jamming agenda into agenda into agenda to close the game. Back to us. We're going to score the Oaktown. Imagine here we had another click left. We could consider jamming the Rashida. We could jam the CityWorks, not the greatest play, or we could put a piece of ice somewhere here. We're going to have to discard a card here. I would discard the Rashida. I think the corporation discards border controls. We're not a threat 4, which is fantastic, but we're now next turn really ready to jam to get to 5 points by jamming the CityWorks in server 1. We're going to throw out the border control. Back to Diogen. He hasn't been running. He draws up, draws a second knife, runs archives here just to check to see what we've been discarding. It's important to keep your opponent honest every once in a while and check what they've been discarding. sees 4 cards in there, no agendas, just a bunch of ice. At this point, we've drawn through 24 cards, so you're expecting more than 2 agendas here, so HQ's probably has something in it. We know it's mostly R&D. Just credit. Throws out a Jaichinho, which is fascinating. That means his hand is probably relatively good, and he's expecting to bypass to get this back on the table. That's not exactly a surprise, but that turn here, not incredibly on tempo. And you notice this deck doesn't have a strong economy, so click for credits. It's going to happen. We need to force him forward. Now here is a big turning point in this match. I think we have a phenomenal line here that works on multiple levels. This is CityWorks Project. You might not be super familiar with this. This is a standard only card. It's installed face up like an Oaktown Renovations, a public agenda. And when the runner axes this card when it's installed, they have to suffer 2 meat damage plus 1 for every advancement. So if we do install advance with this card, you need 4 meat damage to steal this thing. It also will be in this remote server behind 2 ice. And on top of that, it'll be on top of Angelique. So that means the runner needs to steal the CityWorks Project. They need to take 6 meat damage, which means that largely it should be relatively easy to close the game out either with Public Trail and the Lion, or sometimes even just shooting an Angelique from hand because we'll be on threat 3. So this is exactly the sort of setup that we want, that we have. Ideally, we should have had this 4 turns ago, but clearly we're not drawing any agendas. That's just weird. It happens. But that is exactly where we want to be. And after we score out the CityWorks Project, that is the idea. That is the reason why you keep the Audacity, because from that point on, you just do install 3-2, advance, score Audacity, and we can close the game out in 2 to 3 turns from this point going forward. We need the 3-2 agenda. We still have a lot in the deck, but that is our game plan. Get to 5, Audacity. If we had this Audacity in hand, we'd be really well set up. Unfortunately here, I think the corporation gets a bit impatient. Maybe seeing that the runner has thrown out a Jaichinho and expecting the hand has some really nice stuff in it. Maybe seeing the text on CityWorks Project and understanding this is safe if the runner has no cards in hand. Our corporation does the value end of the line. So here Diogen did run archives, has fewer than 8 credits, and I think the corporation here goes and preemptively pulls the trigger. Public Trail goes across, the runner has to take the tag, end of the line empties 4 cards from the hand, leaving the runner nice and alive, keeping funny enough the Ashen Epilogue, and leaving us with 1 click left here. Last click, the corporation just plays a hedge fund. So a couple really important things there. Firstly, we almost never want to value end of the line. Because we went from having a really potent win condition. If at any point in time the runner steps slightly out of line, we can just close the game. We have just let that evaporate. We don't have that anymore. There's a small chance the runner can fear that in our hand we have another copy of End of Line, another copy of Public Trail, and that's going to come on the following turn. Now that can be a possibility the runner has to respect here, but we know obviously we don't have it. And now we've gone from having 2 win conditions to having 1 win condition, which is scoring out agendas in the remote server. I think it's really easy to be holding these cards in your hand for the whole game and think like, they haven't done anything, but we're so close to making these incredibly potent. And mostly they haven't been doing anything because we haven't been pushing into the remote server as aggressively as this deck is largely set up to do. There's been a couple turns that we've just been sitting on Charlotte, and if we're just drawing and finding agendas, which admittedly was just unfortunate we haven't found an agenda yet, we'd be able to get to a point where we can leverage this win condition pretty heavily. Secondly, we played a hedge fund. We've talked about this before. Going from 27 to 31 credits has no impact on the game. We have 6 credit of Irresolute Ice. There's literally no way between now and the end of the game that we can spend 30 credits. So playing money for the sake of money, you want to avoid doing that for sure. Also notably, having the hedge fund in hand is padding. So if the runner ever manages to run HQ here, they will see 2 out of 3 cards with Mercury's ability if Mercury's ability fires, and that's a 66% chance of stealing a CityWorks Project. If we had the hedge fund, that's a 50%. A lot of times cards are just better in your hand to protect your agendas more than they are with the text on whatever the card does when you play them. So this is a really big turning point here. I think maybe the corporation now sees next turn we can do install advance the CityWorks Project and it'll be entirely safe. But again, that is the big difference with this deck. We're not looking for safe. We're actually looking for dangerous, but dangerous for the runner. So if we just jam the CityWorks, install advance at the top of this turn, we're looking to win in just a couple turns. Now, funny enough, back to Diogen, the 1 card he keeps is the Ashen Epilogue. That's super unlikely because this is, as much as it's incredibly expensive, a draw 5 card button, and he just hits it. He Ashens, he just resets the whole thing, gets a new hand, down to 1 credit, which at least that's also a very good window for us, but funny enough, the 1 card that survives. When I first looked at this replay, I don't think I noticed, out of the 5 cards removed from game, one of them is the Jaichinho. That's super funny. That means there's no way that the Jaichinho win condition is going to connect because you need all 3 blades. There's no way to get a blade from out of the game back into the game. That is unfortunate. Now, whether that you needed to Ashen there, I think drawing 5 cards for 5 credits is relatively fair, but unless you can draw into raindrops and get your money back up, it's going to be tricky. But at least here we've reset and got back into our deck our copies of Inside Job and Estebrado and all the sort of stuff that Mercury needs. Because right now, without the Jaichinho, Mercury needs to win with Mercury's text. And Mercury's text means we need to run and bypass stuff largely. And you might have noticed by now, Daijin has no breakers in his deck. The only way that he's going to get into central servers is with Estebrado, which says run a central server, bypass the outermost, spend a click to bypass the innermost once we hit threat 4. And speaking of threat 4, Melandra Gems. This is attached more to a bit of the meta knowledge of what the cards do, but we might have seen by now that Daijin just doesn't have breakers, let alone can't afford breakers, so the only way he's going to deal with any of the ice on our table is the threat 4 text on Melandra Gem. That's really interesting, because we're going to have to eventually get to threat 4 to close the game out. This is actually going to be very, very interesting in the next couple turns, but he has a lot of work to do here, and he's mostly going to have to win the game now with the text of Mercury. So Daijin here on 1 credit starts by raindropsing. I think this is a good way to bounce back into the game. Just going to trade the tree line subroutine for credits and a card draw. Now, this is very, very clever, noticing the way that we said that we don't want to play hedge fund because it doesn't change the game. The runner is literally giving us money. And that's because, again, the difference between 31 and 32 credits does not impact the game. And it's good for Daijin to definitely to see that there. So just bouncing off that, drawing cards and credits, he's going to bravado back or another raindrops, just the same idea. Have a credit, have a credit. We can bravado back if we want to. There we go. Have some more credits. I just need to get back in the game. So at least Daijin now here is on a new hand and up to 8 credits, which is pretty good after he had to click 1, play the Ashen epilogue. That's back to us. Did we draw an agenda? No, we draw a hedge fund, but we're going to just jam the CityWorks project because of course we are. Now to get to the server, you need to get through 2 ice and still have 6 cards in hand. That's very difficult. We have the Angelique to maybe get a lethal if it empties every card from your hand, but we unfortunately no longer have our kill combo, which is exactly what we want on this board state. Daijin here now has not much he can do. Melandra Gem doesn't do anything, so he's just going to draw through his deck, get some money, touch cards and archives. You don't want to be making successful runs for no reason, because public trail at the end of the line can be an issue, and then just draw cards. Click for a credit. It's back to us. This is a very, very interesting line here that we have access to, and I don't think it's incredibly intuitive, but it just shows how cool this matchup is. You might be able to tell that the only way that Daijin's going to be breaking ice in the rest of this game is these Estebrados, which run central servers and can get through 2 ice as long as we're on threat 4, and very importantly, the Melandra Gem, which can bypass any ice in the game as long as we're again on threat 4. If we score out the CityWorks project, we're going to be on threat 5, which means we're on threat 4. But CityWorks project, very weirdly, is one of the agendas that you have no real reason to score out. If we do advance on the CityWorks project and just leave it, if the runner wants to steal the CityWorks project, they're going to have to take 7 meat damage, plus, if that doesn't win them the game, 2 more meat damage from Angelique Garza Correa. It takes 9 meat damage to run this remote server. And the problem is, as soon as we score out the CityWorks project, we are turning on all of Daijin's breakers and all of Daijin's tricks to run central servers. Getting to threat 4 is one of the worst things we can do on this board state, which is so weird. I've never seen a board state exactly like this. That while this is a very heads up play, the line here is very likely advance CityWorks project 3 times and let it chill. You don't need to score it. Now, from that point, we actually have a way to close the game out. From this board state, it's a lot harder, but this is one of the big reasons why we want to keep a copy of Audacity in our hand, because eventually we will draw a 3-2 agenda. And on the turn that we draw a 3-2 agenda, we'll install that agenda, we'll advance it, we'll Audacity it, and on the same turn, we'll score out the CityWorks project and the 3-2 agenda, taking us from 2 to 7 points. Unfortunately, we've used all our spin doctors and our Audacity is not coming back, so we're going to have to work slightly harder here. But that's why you keep the Audacity, because it is just a really nice way to go from 5 to 7. But leaving the CityWorks project on the table and keeping it at 5 counters and even advancing, I don't care, advance it to 8 counters eventually, just make it as safe as possible, is probably the winning line here. Because for a deck that has no breakers, threat 4 is an issue for us. This is a really unique and weird matchup. I think there's a lot of corporation players that are not comfortable with the fact that they've scored an agenda or they can score an agenda and they leave it on the table. I will let agendas stay in the remote server turn after turn after turn, understanding when they're safe and when they're not safe. That is a thing that'll come in time. But the CityWorks project with its inherent defensive/offensive text, it's pretty safe in the remote server. Unfortunately, the corporation does the pretty straightforward play here, which is just score the CityWorks project. And now we are playing Mercury's game, because Mercury has Melandra Gems that fire on threat 4, and we have Estebrados. And now, in a world in which we know there are 5 agendas and 17 cards in R&D, nearly 1 in 3, A single Estebrado can close the game out, let alone even the Melandra gems can now run the remote server, because this can bypass any ice, regardless of strength, once per game before it removes itself. So we have now turned on all the runner stuff. Diogen understands here Jaichinho is out the window, so he needs to be aggressive. I'm imagining at this point in the game, you assume there's agendas in HQ because we've drawn a lot of cards and we've only seen 3 agendas in the game, so he might just send it HQ here. Estebrado R&D instead. I think HQ is probably where the math suggests. We're going to res the outermost hammer, and now Estebrado can cheat through the outermost and click through the innermost. Diogen's going to see 2 cards here on the top of the deck, and we know there's still 5 agendas and 17 cards. Sees 2 cards, no steal, no trash, nothing, which means we know there's 5 agendas in the bottom 15. So straight up 1 in 3 cards is an agenda. That's massively high. Diogen draws up again, and Carpe Diem's archives doesn't run that time. It's back to us. If we had Public Trade at the end of line, notice now he has 13 credits. He has cards in hand, so he's not going to flatline to that. We top deck a Winchester here. How do we close the game out? We close the game out by putting 3 ice, 4 ice on their remote server, and just jamming the last agenda. We're on game point. We know the next card in the deck is not an agenda. We just need to draw an agenda and get into a remote server because it's really hard to run this remote server. This is where border controls are really good because if you use the Melandra gems to bypass a 4-strength Hordem, we can just end the run and then there's no way you're getting back in. Here it's a bit tricky what do you want to do. I would consider drawing once, icing up R&D here. Unfortunately, the corporation plays another hedge fund and we've talked about this already. The idea that we can't do anything on 29 credits, we couldn't do at 24, so we should just do something else probably with this click. Puts a Rashid in server 1, that's fine. It's a bit risky to burst draw when the runner can run HQ and see a whole bunch of your hand when you draw 2 agendas at once, and we're going to click for a credit. Clicking for a credit, again, doesn't really change the game state. I think here we just want to slap ice on R&D. We know the game's on R&D, just 2 more ice on R&D, just res all that ice, which keeps out the Melandra gems, it keeps out the Estebrados. We know the game here is an R&D. Back to Diogen here, drawing up Estebrado and HQ. So just to quickly talk about the runner play, if we had an agenda in hand, would we keep it in our hand? Knowing that the runner is on Estebrado and Alarm Clock and seeing 2 from HQ, going down to 3 cards in the hand, would we keep an agenda in hand? Or would we put it in the remote server? And I think we'd almost definitely put it in the remote server. So I don't love this Estebrado on HQ. I think it's super unlikely to connect with an agenda. We're just happy here Diogen is using his limited options to contest our central servers because he only has so many copies of Estebrado and so many copies of Melandra gem before he literally runs out of ways to touch central server agendas and cards in general. So he's going to bypass the Pharos. He's going to click through this Pharos. He's going to see 2 cards with Mercury. He's going to see a Winchester, which he knew we drew. And he's going to see an Angelique Garza Correa. Doesn't fire unless it's installed. Probably going to trash that. And Blueberry Diesel to draw a bit. And then draw a couple more with an actual name brand original Diesel. This goes back to us. We have Rashida. Rashida is a bit risky here. Because if we draw 4 cards, if 2 of them are agendas, that can be a problem for us. I think we still need to do it. Not that we need the money. We need the card draw. So we draw up with Rashida, we draw 1 agenda. There's still 4 agendas and 12 cards in R&D. That's still 1 in 3. Here, if we install Advance the Oaktown, it is installed face up. That is a bit tricky because the runner knows there's an agenda in there for sure. This is turn 16. This is not a deck that you really want to go to a long game. And admittedly, a lot of that was a bit of an unfortunate draw. Now, whenever we look at the runner's board, we're trying to have an idea of what sort of reach they have. Basically, what ice can they break? Where can they get accesses? Where does that matter? And seeing on the table 2 Melandra gems, while it's going to be relatively expensive because the Melandra gems are 1 chance fires before they remove themselves from the game because we have higher strength ice, Diogen can run server 1 pretty easily. He just Melandra gems the outermost, Melandra gems the innermost, and he's in. On top of that, we know he has inside jobs. So it's in our best interest that we try and get 4 ice on the remote server, 3 ice on the remote server, so that if he wants to run the remote server, he's forced to use his 2 Melandra gems, and then he has no Melandra gems. And that might mean he has very few ways to contest central servers and remote servers for the rest of the game. We just need to force him to use his cards. We see 1 Melandra gem here, so that's the whole suite. So for that reason, I think we have 2 lines. 1 line is to install and end the run ice on server 1. So we can install the tree line here and just do nothing. And then on the following turn, we can install the Oaktown, advance the Oaktown, and put the 4th ice on there. It's going to be really hard for Diogen to get through a 4 ice remote server. Now, notably here, we are shifting gears. We're playing more like a Glacier deck, and that's largely because we understand the runner only can make so many runs for the rest of the game, but most importantly, because we did a bit preemptively fire a Public Trail to end a line combo. So if all we have is ice, we're going to have to make the ice work for us for sure. The other line is just put an ice on the remote server, install advance the Oaktown. If Diogen can't get in there for some reason, he loses the game because we'll get to 7 points. So he's forced there to maybe spend his 2 Melandra gems, and that could be an issue for him. Now the corporation here ices HQ, installs the Oaktown, and advances the Oaktown. Now the Oaktown here, we actually know the runner can get in there Maybe we're fine with it if they end up using 2 Melandra gems, but Diogen here probably has an inside job or a way to cheat through this. We know he has an inside job on the deck, so at best case, maybe he keeps 1 Melandra gem. Now the Winchester on HQ, as you see in our hand, actually has no impact on this game. We know all the agendas are in R&D, and if we top deck an agenda, we're not probably going to keep it in HQ. We're probably going to just put it immediately into the remote server. So making HQ safe doesn't actually matter. Now, that being said, a lot of this game comes down to information and also misinformation. This Winchester here might make it look like we have an agenda in hand, and so now Diogen might overextend and spend a lot of effort getting into HQ because it looks like we have something there. But plays like this are at least interesting because it forces the runner to maybe make the wrong play. Now back to Diogen here, draws up a bit, has the inside job, and is just doing the line that we probably could expect. He's going to bypass the outermost tree line and Melandra gem RFG to get through the inner Whoredom and steal the Oaktown renovation here. I think the corporation here forgets to res Angelique. You need a res Angelique for her text to be relevant. I think we'd pay 2 credits to do 2 meat damage just because it might get another Estabrado out of hand, another inside job out of hand, and that actually has a huge impact on the game because these are the cards that win off central servers. So unfortunately, we forget to res that, steals the Oaktown, trashes the Angelique with Miss Bones money, and he just Estabrado's R&D. We know R&D here has 4 agendas and 12 cards. We're going to bypass the hammer. We're going to click through the tree line and see 2 cards on top of the deck. We know there's so many agendas in here, and Diogen finds 4 points off the top. 16 turns in only 15 minutes. The players are actually playing quite fast and loose there, which is phenomenal. Like, that's kind of how you want to play this deck. But gaining 110 credits to the runner's 58, unfortunately, we were not able to capitalize and force the runner into a corner where we were meant to kill them with public trail and to end the line. I think this matchup is so fascinating for so many reasons. Firstly, the fact that the runner's win condition shifts greatly across the game because of recursion and damage and Ashen Epilogue, that's wild. Secondly, the fact that the runner presents themselves as a super aggressive aggro beatdown deck, but at the end of the day, they're not the beatdown deck. We are the beatdown deck as long as we can stick that path. For the first 5 or so turns of the game, we were on track there. We were being aggressive, we were forcing interaction, we were leading and forcing the runner to play our game. We had the kill combo, we had the fork, we had to understand we need to force the runner into the remote server, we need to force successful runs when they have not enough money and not enough cards in hand. Unfortunately, once the Charlotte got a bit too comfortable, we slowed down and spent a lot of clicks getting economy, money that we didn't exactly need, and we stopped pressuring the runner. Now, Diogen's economy in this deck is a bit soft, and he really valued having a couple turns there just to draw up and click for credits. Inherently, this deck is trying to do a bit more on events as opposed to spending econ breaking cards, which that's fine. If Diogen doesn't have economy, we can probably end the line a bit with public trail. Now, we also did unfortunately throw our combo a bit early. We had the really good setup there to get down that big old CityWorks project. And also we had a really cool line where if we leave the CityWorks at 5 counters and just don't score it out, we actually turn off almost all the cards that we lost to over the next 2 turns, all the threat 4 stuff, which is kind of inherently a bit hard to interact with. Finally, Border Control, Audacity, the cards we discarded are some of the best cards on our list. If we had Border Control in the remote server, it's almost impossible to contest the remote server because once you use one of your Melandra gems, once you use your inside job, you just end the run and you force the runner to have to go back again. And that is a big problem when they have limited resources to make those successful runs. You could also consider Border Control on centrals because that's how we end up losing. We lose to run events on central servers eventually. But by the time we had Border Controls in our hand, we were much more equipped to push the game into the remote server and speed the game up as opposed to playing defensively and putting stuff in on the central servers and making ourselves glaciery. Finally, the Audacity. Our 0.5 win condition is so important we keep this in hand because we can win the game if we just top deck the right 3-2 agenda when we're on 5 points. We actually had a turn, I believe, in which if we kept Audacity, we could have won. Unfortunately, we didn't draw any of the 3-2s. There's one more in the deck. Diogen found all our atlases. We have an above the law in there. But there's another win condition, which we always want to hold on to because it's really nice to go to 5 to win the game on the spot. Really fun matchup there. Again, built to last. This sort of deck, I think it's just fantastic for newer players to force you to think about your alternate win conditions, forcing interaction, and trying to lead the narrative of the game. Put things in the remote server. Get to game point quickly. Let the runner understand if they're trying to keep up to you, they have to deal with your meat damage combo, and that can be hard to deal with if we're on game point. That's the built to last deck. I was really excited with this replay because there's a lot going on and there's definitely a lot to talk about. In short, again, you want to always be leading because otherwise you're following. And as a corporation deck, if we lead and the runner can't keep up to the speed of our dance, they will have their line ended. And that's exactly where we want them to be. It's really easy sometimes with Charlotte, with your hedge funds. The fact that you can advance your Whoredom to gain a credit feels better than clicking for credit. Just always keep in mind, does money matter? we ended the game on 34 credits, and that is arguably about 20 credits more than we needed. Some of that money we got from just charloting, it'll happen, but we spent a lot of clicks getting money we don't need. And just keep that in mind when you're playing your decks, especially decks that have a lot of money. You don't always have to play the cards that you top deck. And I think that's mostly it. Again, if you're watching this and you have any questions, any comments, any feedback, please hit me up in the YouTube comments. I want to do more replay reviews like this. Now, if you're playing in JNet and you find yourself maybe struggling, you want to push your gameplay a bit further as a newer developing player, you can save your replays. And I would actually highly recommend spending some time looking at your own replays, especially when you see both players' hands. And it gives you a bit more information on what board states look like, what board states felt like. And it's often easier in hindsight without the stress of playing the game to look back and think, oh, that probably wasn't the play. Secondly, too, if you want to send a JSON replay file to metropolegrid@gmail.com, again, metropolegrid@gmail.com, I generally take a look at all of them, and some of them line up really well for replays like this. And I'd be very excited to put more content like this on the channel. We just need to farm the replays for that to happen. So again, if you have a replay you think makes sense, a close game, something where you think your fundamentals are not exactly there, send them my way kindly, and there's a chance it can end up in a video like this. And of course, finally, thanks to Diogen for submitting this replay against the anonymous opponent for playing Built to Last. Hopefully you're having fun with this deck out there. But thanks so much for watching. If you want to take a second to like the video, it really helps the channel grow. And with that, we'll be back. Again, we stream Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we have some more video content, even more deck dives as well coming up. Thanks so much for watching. Ciao. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Replay reviews are a lot of fun, and we got really good feedback on the last runner ones that we've done. We haven't done them consistently, but the question was, is there a corporation side of this? And hey, I hear you. It's about time that we got this up, and hopefully there's more to come in the future. I think it was one of the biggest things I saw for new players who are coming into the game, either from System Gateway or from Startup, that in most standard decks, the most common opening is not ice up central servers. It's put something in a remote server, ice that up, play an economy card, something like that. And as you see here, if you can make the game about the remote server, if you can control the narrative, if you can lead the dance, it is such an important thing. So hopefully it gives you a bit more confidence to be pushing out in your remote servers and putting things in remotes that matter. The game's pretty fun when things in the remote server matter, especially if they're not always agendas. Now, of course, I want to give a huge thank you to all these names here and more. The Metropole Grid were supported on Patreon. These sort of recordings, editing, all this sort of stuff takes a lot of time, and it simply just wouldn't be possible without the support from all these folks here, and of course, our generous daily cast patrons as well. Thank you so much. If you want to find out more, you can support the Metropole Grid on Patreon. The link is in the description. Any sort of support is incredibly appreciated. We'll be back in a bit. We have a week off coming up, so there'll be more video content than live streams for the next little while. Jeff and I are going to be returning to our tier list shortly. Rebellion without rehearsal, 2 months in. What is it, 3 months in now, to see how the competitive standard meta has shook out. Those are always really fun to revisit. And we should be having more videos up really soon from the Deep Dive series. We're on C. C is Captain Padma. Let's see what we can charge. And of course, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.